The Scottish shipbuilding industry stretches along the banks of the River Clyde from Glasgow to the sea, but it's the yards of the Upper Clyde that are in trouble at the moment. From these yards have come many of the ships that once made British shipbuilding the envy of the world. Giant transatlantic liners like the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth, and an armada of naval craft of all kinds. But those days are now over. Britain has slipped down to 5th place in the International Shipbuilding League with barely 6% of world output. Reasons for the decline are varied. Failure to modernize, failure to solve labor problems, failure above all to meet the challenge from overseas, notably Japan. In the last 2 decades, Japan's shipbuilders have achieved the same meteoric rate of expansion as the Japanese economy as a whole. They now launch over 32 million tons of shipping a year. That's roughly half the world tonnage. The Japanese success has been based on everything the British yards lack: up-to-date equipment, strict cost control, and excellent labor relations. Three and a half years ago, the British government decided to step in to save the Upper Clyde yards by joining them together into one company, Upper Clyde Shipbuilders, or UCS. The government itself became the largest shareholder with just under 50% of the shares, and nearly £25 million of taxpayers' money went into keeping UCS afloat. But the company started out with several millstones round its neck. This was one of them, the QE2, the £30 million successor to the earlier Queen's. There's no doubt that the QE2 is one of the best, most luxurious liners now afloat, but UCS delivered it 4 months late, and the owners are claiming £2 million in compensation. The QE2 was far from being the worst example of Upper Clyde's slow delivery. The container ship Jarvis Bay was delivered no less than a year late. UCS now face a penalty of £1,000 a day. When the company faced bankruptcy earlier this year, the government refused to bail it out. An investigating group later concluded the failure had been inevitable. But was it? We asked the Minister for Trade and Industry, John Lewis.
That's certainly the view of the group. They regard it as being a body which, from the moment it was set up, was doomed in the end to come to grief. And it's come to grief now. I think there's no doubt of it. There was nothing to be done about it.
Would it be fair to say that there are likely to be something like 5,000 or 6,000 redundancies on Upper Clyde?
I think it would be impossible to make a guess at the moment. Clearly, I think nothing is worse than to try and say what you think will happen when you really don't know on such a very sensitive matter as people's employment. What you do know is that there will be only a small number of redundancies at the outset. And after that, what you have got to work for, and what in fact we are all seeking to work for, is to make sure that there is the minimum subsequent number, compatible obviously with having sound businesses and not having these dreadful disasters around the corner the whole time. So that I'm bound to say the numbers which may eventually be redundant is at this moment not possible to assess.
Much of your hopes for Upper Clyde shipbuilding depends on union cooperation. Do you think you're really likely in the present climate to get union cooperation?
Well, I do. I think that it would be really extremely unwise and, to my mind, not at all understanding of the problem of the unions if they didn't. There are, after all, they're as keen as I am to see shipbuilding survive on the Upper Clyde. They're as keen as I am to try and have a successful industry which can expand later. The only way to get that is really to work out arrangements together. If they don't do so, then the likelihood of having that survival is absolutely neutralized.
On the Clyde itself, there were few signs that such cooperation would be forthcoming. Immediate reaction to the government's decision was undisguised anger.
Workers, we're all Jock Thompson's bairns, we all work for the UCS, and irregardless what division that they think they're putting to the world, they're not on. We're going to war.
I would set fire to the damn place.
That wouldn't keep you your jobs, would it?
No, but at least it would, you would get your feelings sort of relieved, wouldn't you?
About 400 men were laid off immediately, but with the prospect of thousands more redundancies to come, all UCS workers hurried to mass meetings to hear their union leaders propose a drastic plan of action. Shop steward James Airlie spelt it out in no uncertain terms.
We will take over these yards, we will man the gates, we will not go down the roads. That, briefly, brother, is the recommendation of the Joint Shop Stewards Committee. So we will be proposing to these shop stewards...
What the unions proposed had few precedents in the history of British industrial relations. It was not to be a strike, but a work-in, with the men themselves taking over the functions of management. The redundancy notices would simply be ignored. The men laid off would continue to work, and their wages would be paid out of voluntary contributions from their workmates. It was an emotional response, a desperate act of defiance against the harsh economic facts which had for so long been pushing the Clyde shipyards into a more and more untenable position. Besides controlling access to the yards, the shop stewards organised morning meetings among themselves to discuss day-to-day working in the yards and plan tactics for the immediate future.
Goes to Amsterdam, that I and Jimmy Reid attend the Scottish Miners Delegate Conference next week, and that Sammy Barr and Sammy Gilmer attend the mass meeting of Swan Hunter workers on Friday. Is that agreed, brothers? Agreed. Great.
Most of the clerical staff have supported the work-in by continuing to make up the wages as usual. Another sign of normality are the regular deliveries of steel from outside suppliers. What really annoys many of the workers is that the government's decision to close the yards came after a year of definite progress in which output nearly doubled, even though the workforce had been cut by a quarter. Industrial problems, a view shared by many of the men involved.
I'll go down the lawn, turn around again.
Has got to be the new weapon employed by the working class of this country if they are going to stop the spread of unemployment, which is creating paralysis all over Britain, not only here in Clydeside.
The unions claim their appeal to the redundant men to report to work as usual has been 100% successful. Willie McGuinness is one of the men's shop stewards. Now he's also their boss, and when those who'd been made redundant gathered outside the yard gates for the first time since they'd been laid off, it was he who collected their insurance cards. Jimmy Dernan works every day, but he's got no card to clock in because officially he's not on the payroll.
I've been made redundant. I just come into my work as per usual. I'll do the same amount of work I'll work under the same supervision, and I'll get my pay at the weekend, and it'll be equivalent to what I would normally get anyway. So actually, I'm only redundant in the word alone.
Financial contributions from many trade unions have been flowing into the Shipbuilding Workers Emergency Fund on Clydeside. It all helps to maintain the fight, but the local union leadership is at pains to stress there's nothing really revolutionary about their actions.
We have never put the interpretation workers' control or had airy-fairy workers' revolution. That is interpretations from outside the UCS. We are fighting for the right to work, we're fighting for this industry, we're fighting for the working people of Scotland.
To make this work-in succeed, you've got to persuade not only the unions, but the managements of big firms like British Steel and British Oxygen to continue to supply goods to the yards. Do you really think you can do this?
We think that can be arranged, but the important point that we see it as a catalyst, and we are saying that we can be defeated. We can be starved into submission, but we are saying it's the responsibility of the labour movement to see that that does not happen. It is not only our fight, it is a fight of all decent men and women that fight for the right to work.
So what guarantees would the unions accept before they'd agree to end the work-in? Shop stewards leader Jimmy Reid.
We will end the work-in, as we've stated previously, on the basis of a course of action which maintains shipbuilding intact and envisages a restructuring based on utilising all the potentialities of shipbuilding in the upper reaches, which also involves a restructuring for growth and not for disintegration or contraction.
And are you more hopeful of getting this now than you have been in the past?
Hopeful is a rather imponderable word.
A possible solution to the UCS crisis may lie in the hands of this man, Archibald Kelly, a self-made Scottish millionaire who already has several large business interests on the Clyde. He's made a proposal to the government to buy all 4 UCS yards, but could he maintain their present workforce?
Well, I wouldn't really be able to answer that question until I have the financial report to see just exactly whether the company could afford to carry on with that number of labour force. But I would certainly emphasise that no matter what happens, the company will require to be reorganised. Absolutely no doubt about it. But I believe the men recognise that also.
It quickly became clear that Mr. Kelly would be unable to finance a purchase of all the yards, but he's now interested in only the John Brown yard at Clydebank, where he hopes to build a multi-million-pound dry dock, a deal that depends on substantial government aid. Will he get it? We asked the Minister for Industry, Sir John Eden.
I know that in the present situation, people reach out to him as the possibility on which larger numbers of the existing labour force can be retained in shipbuilding. I understand this very fully indeed, but I think it would be quite wrong to give the impression that at this stage we have done other than receive the documents and haven't had a chance to study them more thoroughly.
One does get the feeling, Sir John, that today's meeting really took the wind out of Mr. Kelly's sails.
I'm not sure about that at all. I think that Mr. Kelly fully understands that we need time to look at these things. I don't think he expected an answer across the table. I wasn't in a position to give it in any case. And apart from that, I mean, his interest in Clydebank alone has always been extremely seriously regarded, and he knows that as well. By and large, he has a lot of interest involved in Clydebank, as does the government.
Surrounded by a strict security guard, Mr. Davis himself came to Clydeside to meet the union officials. He was given a very hostile reception. The minister spent 5 hours talking to the unions, seeking a formula to solve the crisis which both sides could accept. he didn't succeed in finding one, and before the talks finished, the unions walked out. Leader of the union delegation, Jimmy Reid, explained why.
And Davis is up here this afternoon, quite clearly now, in an exercise of public relations. Waffle, that's what we got, and if that was his objective, as it clearly was, then he's totally underestimated the Clydeside and the Scottish people, and we're not having any of it.
But Mr. Davis himself was not displeased about the way the talks had gone.
I think it has been constructive, and I think that the fact that they sat through it and contributed very much to it over 5 hours is really rather proof of the fact that it wasn't a waste of time, to them or to me. The fact that's inevitable is that a meeting like that is not destined to reach a whole lot of final conclusions. It won't do so. It will simply serve to allow both parties to talk with one another, tell one another their views, their reticences, their complaints and criticisms, and that all happened. I would go back with a great sheaf of notes and a lot of thoughts, which I'll have to think about more. What I don't go back with is any fundamental change in the belief that it is possible to have an active shipbuilding industry on the Upper Clyde of a limited kind. I don't think it's more than that. Is possible, but it will only be achieved if there is a concerted action by all concerned.
What would you say is the most likely consequence of the work-in?
It's difficult for me to say. I think that in some ways, as I've mentioned, the work-in itself has produced some rather encouraging things, for instance, like the obvious desire of the whole of the workforce to work and to work well. I mean, this must obviously be an encouraging reaction, and I applaud them for it. I hope that this immediate thing, though, will give way to something which, as I say, is more constructive. And that constructive thing will only be achieved by seeking then to marry their efforts and ours to try and get a viable operation.
The men are demanding the right to work. Do you accept that they have this right? And if so, what work can the government provide for them to replace the jobs they've lost?
The only thing I think that the government can and must do, and has striven strongly to do, is to find every means possible of creating the climate for investment in this area which will overcome the shortfall of jobs. Now, this has been already very much tended to in the field of special incentives for West Central Scotland because of the particular conditions here. It is as yet not using, however, an upsurging investment in the whole country, which is the necessary additional thing, and this has not yet occurred.
The next day, it was the turn of Labour Party leader Harold Wilson, who, in contrast to Mr. Davis, was given a hero's welcome from crowds of enthusiastic workers. Mr. Wilson made the most of his opportunity to be seen fraternizing with the workers, chatting amongst them in the staff canteen and sharing their problems as well as their tea.
That on behalf of the British Labour movement, I am here to assert the right of the shipbuilding workers of Upper Clyde of the right to work.
Very good.
As Prime Minister of the government that set up UCS, Mr. Wilson had good political reasons for seeing the crisis solved. Quite apart from the economic arguments, there were the social implications of increasing unemployment on the Clyde. We asked the Labour leader if he would have kept the yards open regardless of economic consequences.
For social reasons, regardless of the economic consequences?
I think it's an outrage, of course, to close them down on social grounds alone. The misery of workers, their families, the insecurity, a whole area rendered a still more depressed area at a time of the highest unemployment. Problem of school leavers who can't find jobs, apprentices who've been in the yards for 2 or 3 years and are turned off just like that. I think on social grounds, even on the financial aspects of social grounds, it is far better, if you had to put money into the yards to keep them open, to do that, than to pay unemployment benefit and see a whole area decay, and men decay with it, and young boys. On the other hand, I do not believe that what I'm proposing is going to be costly. I think it will be a big saving compared with what will be thrown away, in economic terms, in unemployment benefit. So I have put forward this proposal first. It's not a new one, it was put in Glasgow to him by, I think, somebody from the Chamber of Commerce movement, being put in the House of Commons too. that the government should now take over the yards with financial responsibility for 5 years to give the yards a chance to prove themselves. Look, management workers are certain they can pay their way without a penny from the National Exchequer. The only problem today is a shortage of immediate cash. It's not a problem of the yards paying their way. Do that for a period, somebody suggested yesterday, 5 years. I don't stick by any figure. I believe at the end of the day we'll have these yards healthy. They're already very much more efficient than they were 2 or 3 years ago before we formed Upper Clyde Shipbuilders. The second thing is this: they have devised, instead of producing different ships for different owners all the time, which is very costly, very inefficient, this standard ship, the Clyde ship, which is a kind of standard utility merchantman, the Super Clyde, which is coming, the bulk carriers, produced with one yard laid out for producing just like almost like a motor car factory produces one car after another. What I've suggested is the government should now, as we did, and indeed they have, as the present government have in relation to computers and other things, to place a pre-production order. Place an order for, what, 6, 12, whatever figure it is, of Clyde tankers, Super Clyde tankers, bulk carriers. Place the order when there's a slump in shipbuilding orders. At a fair price, negotiated by the government without any question of a subsidy. At the end of the day, sell it to people who want it, and will be glad to get quick delivery. The ships may be almost finished by the time they come along. If the government makes a profit, good luck to them, I'll be delighted. If there's a slight loss, well, it's a commercial proposition, but, you know, every government in the world subsidizes the shipbuilding industry except Britain.
Of course, as I said earlier,